Welcome to Turning the Heel for the State Street Socks pattern as part of the Give a Stitch series through Fiber Forward. Now that you've worked your heel flap, we're going to work on turning the heel. Don't let this scare you, it's not as hard as it seems, and we'll work through it together. For rows 1 through 4, we'll work through them together, and we'll start with row 1, where we're going to knit across the first 17 stitches. That's 10, 7 more. So we have 17. Let's count them just to be triple sure. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. Now what I'm going to do is slip, slip, knit. If you're not familiar with this technique, you'll want to check out our slip, slip, knit video tutorial. We'll go slip, slip, and it's kind of tricky, get it in this little, there we go. Slip, slip, knit, knit 1. I usually place a stitch marker here because I just want to be sure of where I'm at. So I use a ring a lot of times. So let's just use a ring. So it's really obvious, right? So we've done all of our first row and we're now ready to turn our work. Literally, we just flip it over. Work flipped. Okay, so now I'm going to put my stitch marker on the other needle and I'm going to start the second row. We're going to slip 1 purlwise, which we've done here. We're going to purl 5. 1, 2, that's 3, 4, 5. Now we're going to purl 2 together. If you're unfamiliar with purling 2 together, check out the video tutorial for purling 2 together. You can probably learn it from watching here though. We're going to go through 1 loop. We're going to go through the second loop. Purl these 2 together as a decrease. Purl 1. Now turn your work. Row 2, complete. Now row 3. And the stitch marker is going to help us out on this one. We're going to slip 1 purlwise. Great. Knit to 1 stitch before the gap, which is going to be 6 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now here's what's cool. We're going to slip, slip, knit. And so we're going to take one from this side of the gap, from the right side of the gap. We're going to go across the stitch marker to the other side of the gap. So we'll slip, get rid of the stitch marker, slip, knit, oops, there we go, knit, knit 1, And then I'm going to put my stitch marker back, and then I'm going to turn my work. Okay? So now we've done row 3. Now we're going to hit row 4. We're going to slip one purlwise. I think you're noticing a pattern, right? Slipping one purlwise. We're going to purl to one stitch before the gap, which for us, it's going to be 7 stitches. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you'll see a gap here. The other stitches are much tighter, and you can see this gap. That's the gap we're looking for right here. Okay? So we're going to do much like row 3, where we did a slip. Actually, no, we're purling 2 together. I'm sorry. So from each side of the gap, we're going to take this stitch here. Here's the gap. Second stitch, we're going to purl 2 together from each side of the gap. So purl 2 together. Here. Purl 1. Feel free to put another stitch marker here. We can do that for this. Use my other ring. Now let's turn our work. We're going to repeat rows 3 and 4 until all the heel stitches have been worked, and we're going to end with the wrong side row. So if you want to join me, we'll continue the video here to do it along together, because sometimes it can be a little intimidating on your first sock. So if not, you can keep working on your heel turn and then meet us back at the heel gusset. Let's continue working together. We're going to slip one purlwise. We're going to knit to one stitch before the gap. You'll probably notice that you're a quicker knitter than I am. I'm quite slow as a thrower. I also had wrist surgery when I was in college, which explains the scars here, and why my hands are a little unsteady sometimes. So now we're back on row 3 at one stitch before this gap. So we're going to slip, slip, knit, we're going to knit one, put our stitch marker back here, if it'll cooperate, and then we'll turn our work. Get a little more yarn here. Great. So that's another row 3. Now we're on row 4. We're going to slip one purlwise, right? So now you can see the gap that's been created where the stitch marker is. We're going to knit to that one stitch before the gap, which is marked with my ring this time. It's so cool to watch the different parts of the sock knitting up. This was my very first sock that I worked, and the only sock I've worked so far. I'm learning this with you. Okay, so we're one stitch before the gap, and what we're going to do is we're going to purl 2 together. So I'm going to get rid of my stitch marker by cheating a little. We're going to purl 2 together here. I'm going to purl 1, and then I'm going to put my ring back. And then I'm going to turn my work. and we're turned. And now, even after these first two of this 3 and 4, you can see how the heel is starting to really take a shape, right? So we're going to stitch 1 purlwise, knit to 1 stitch before that gap again,